Hey Reddit, I've been lurking here for years but never thought I'd be posting myself. I need some advice, or maybe just a vent, about my current situation with my parents. I'm Alex, 34, and I bought my first house last year in insert big city. It cost me just over $800,000, which is insane, but that's the price you pay to be closer to career opportunities. I've worked my ass off to get to this point, and I'm proud to say I pay my own mortgage, utilities, and all other expenses. It's not easy, but I make it work. Here's the twist. My parents, Mary, 63, and Robert, 62, live with me rent-free. It's not like they begged to move in or anything. I offered. They're both retired and were struggling a bit with their finances. Their house needed repairs, and they didn't have enough saved to maintain their lifestyle in retirement. I figured moving in together would solve a lot of problems. They'd save money, I'd have some company, and I'd get to help them out like they've helped me over the years. At first, it was fine. My parents were grateful and I liked having them around. Mom would cook dinner sometimes, and Dad would help with little things around the house, like fixing the leaky faucet or mowing the lawn. But lately, things have started to feel off. For starters, my mom is treating the house like it's hers. She's rearranging furniture, buying random decor without asking, and even had the nerve to suggest I tone down my home office because it's too cluttered. That's my workspace, where I spend 8+ hours a day. Paying for this house she's living in for free. Feels like she's trying to take over, and it's driving me insane. My dad is quieter, but he has his quirks too. He's constantly watching TV, and it's always on full volume, even when I'm trying to work. I've politely asked him to turn it down or use headphones, but he brushes me off like I'm a kid complaining about chores. The kicker? They've started hosting people, without telling me. A few weeks ago, I came home from a long day to find two of their old friends sitting in MY living room, eating MY snacks, like it was some kind of social club. I bit my tongue at the time, but after it happened again last week, I told them they need to at least give me a heads up before inviting people over. My mom acted like I was being dramatic, saying, "This is their home too, and that's the thing. Is it their home? Sure, they live here, but I'm the one paying for everything. I'm the one who's worked to make this house a reality. I don't mind helping my parents out, but there's a line between supporting someone and being taken advantage of. I feel like they're starting to cross it. I haven't even mentioned the little digs my mom's been making. Stuff like, maybe you'd have a family by now if you weren't so focused on work. Or, don't you think this place is a little big for just one person? It's like she's forgotten I'm the one doing her a favor, not the other way around. I don't want to kick my parents out. They're not terrible people, and I know they'd struggle if they had to find their own place again. But I also can't keep living like this, feeling like a guest in my own home. Has anyone else been in a similar situation? How do you set boundaries with family without completely blowing up the relationship? And that's where I'm at. Reddit. Any advice would be appreciated. Thanks for listening. Hey Reddit. I wish I could say things have gotten better since my last post, but life's decided to throw another curveball. I honestly don't even know where to begin with this one, so I'll just dive in. The other day, my mom casually told me over breakfast that my older brother Danny, 36, and his wife Sophie, 32, were thinking about moving in. For some context, Danny's always been the golden child in my mom's eyes. He's the responsible one, the family man, the one who always seems to have his life together, at least on the surface. Danny and Sophie are expecting their first baby in a few months, and apparently, things have been tight for them financially. Now I get it. Babies are expensive, and life doesn't always go as planned. But what pissed me off was how my mom presented it like it was a done deal. She didn't ask me if I was okay with it. She just said, "It'll be nice having the whole family together under one roof." I immediately told her that wasn't going to work. My house isn't exactly a mansion, and there's no way I'm cramming 4 adults and a baby into this space. Plus, I didn't buy this house to turn it into a boarding house for the entire family. Mom brushed me off, saying Danny and Sophie wouldn't be too much trouble, and that it would only be for a little while. I pushed back harder, saying I needed time to think about it, but she kept insisting it was a good idea. That was the first red flag. The second red flag came 2 days later when Danny and Sophie showed up at my front door. Suitcases, boxes, and all. No warning, no phone call, just them standing there like they'd been invited. I was stunned. Apparently, my mom told them it was fine to move in and that Alex would understand. I was so angry I couldn't even speak at first. Danny just smiled and said, "We'll stay out of your way, I promise." Like that was supposed to make everything okay. I pulled my mom aside and asked her what the hell she was thinking. She acted like I was overreacting, saying, "They're family, Alex. Where else are they supposed to go?" I reminded her, very firmly, that this is my house and decisions like this aren't hers to make. She got defensive, saying I was being selfish and that Danny and Sophie didn't have anywhere else to go. But here's the thing, they absolutely do. They've been renting a nice apartment for years and could have stayed there if they weren't blowing money on stupid stuff like vacations and expensive gadgets. This isn't an emergency. It's just poor planning on their part. Danny and Sophie weren't any better. When I told them this wasn't okay, they both acted like I was the bad guy. Sophie even started crying, saying, "We're family, Alex. How can you turn us away?" Danny just stood there, glaring at me like I just kicked a puppy. I didn't know what to say, so I reluctantly let them bring their stuff in. I figured I'd give them one night to figure things out and then talk to them the next day about leaving. But now it's been 3 days, and they're still here. They've taken over the guest room, and Sophie's already complaining about how the bed isn't comfortable enough. Danny keeps borrowing my stuff without asking, like my laptop charger and my tools, and somehow they've managed to fill the kitchen with their groceries, shoving mine to the back of the fridge. It's like they're settling in for the long haul, and I'm starting to feel like a stranger in my own home. To make matters worse, my mom keeps guilt-tripping me every time I bring up the fact that Danny and Sophie need to leave. She keeps saying things like, "You'd do the same thing if you were in their shoes?" Or, "What kind of brother are you if you can't help your own family?" I'm starting to lose my mind here. I know I need to put my foot down, but I'm worried it's going to cause a huge blow-up. Danny and my mom both have strong personalities, and I feel like no matter what I say, I'm going to come out looking like the villain. At the same time, I can't keep living like this. It's my house, my life, and I feel like I've lost control of both. Reddit, what do I do? How do I handle this without completely destroying my relationship with my family? Or is that even possible at this point? Any advice would mean a lot right now. Hey Reddit, things have officially gone from bad to worse. I didn't think it was possible, but somehow my family has managed to take disrespect to a whole new level. I'm seriously at my wit's end here. After my brother Danny and his wife Sophie moved in unannounced, I was already feeling like a guest in my own home. But this week, they crossed a line I never imagined they'd even approach. Sophie, who's expecting their first baby, started making little comments about how their setup in the guest room wasn't ideal for a pregnant woman. At first, it was subtle stuff like, "It's so cramped in here," or, "I don't know how we're going to fit a crib in this room." I tried to ignore it, figuring she just needed to vent, but then she started getting bolder. One night during dinner, she outright said, "It would make so much more sense if we had the master bedroom. You're just one person, Alex, and we have a baby on the way." I laughed, thinking she had to be joking, but her expression stayed completely serious. Danny chimed in, saying, "We'd even keep the place cleaner and make it more functional. It's not like you really need all that space." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them flat out that the master bedroom was off limits and reminded them that this is my house. I work hard to afford this place, and the bedroom is one of the few spots where I feel like I still have some privacy. They both acted offended, with Sophie pouting and Danny muttering something about how I shouldn't be so selfish. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated how entitled they could be. A few days later, while I was at work, they decided to take matters into their own hands. When I got home, I noticed the hallway was cluttered with boxes and some of my personal belongings. Books, clothes, even my bedside lamp. I went upstairs to find Danny and Sophie in my bedroom, mid-move. They had already cleared out half of my stuff and were making themselves comfortable like they owned the place. I lost it. I told them to get out of my room immediately and started putting my things back. Sophie had the audacity to act like I was overreacting, saying, We were just trying to make things easier for everyone. Danny doubled down, saying, "It's not like you're losing anything. You've still got the guest room." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I reminded them again that this is my house, that they were already here without my permission, and now they were trying to steal my bedroom on top of everything else. Sophie started crying, saying she didn't feel welcome, and that I was making her pregnancy stressful. Danny glared at me like I was some kind of monster and said, "You're being so unreasonable, Alex. We're family." I told them, in no uncertain terms, that this was the last straw. I said if they didn't respect my boundaries and stop pulling this crap, they'd have to leave. Danny accused me of threatening his pregnant wife, and Sophie just kept crying louder. My mom, of course, took their side when she got home, saying I was being too harsh, and that I needed to think about the baby. I'm at a complete loss here. I feel like I'm living in some kind of nightmare. They've been in my house for less than 2 weeks, and it's already spiraling out of control. I know I need to stand my ground, but the guilt tripping and manipulation are relentless. Part of me wants to just kick them out and be done with it, but I know that would cause a massive family rift. Reddit, how do I handle this? I feel like I'm being pushed into a corner, and no matter what I do, I'm going to be painted as the bad guy. If anyone has advice, or even just some moral support, I could really use it right now. Reddit, I'm done. Absolutely done. I've tried to keep the peace. I've tried to be understanding, patient, and reasonable. But this week I hit my breaking point. After catching Danny and Sophie mid-move into my bedroom and shutting that down, things were already tense. Danny was sulking, Sophie was crying on and off for 2 days, and my mom kept giving me the silent treatment while making exaggerated sighs anytime I was in the room. It was exhausting. Then I found out something that made my blood boil. While I was venting to a friend over the phone about the whole bedroom debacle, I mentioned that Danny and Sophie must have come up with this ridiculous idea on their own. My mom, who was in the kitchen and clearly eavesdropping, suddenly poked her head in and said, "Well, actually, I did suggest it to them." I froze. "You what?" I asked, not believing what I'd just heard. My mom shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. "I thought it made sense. Sophie's pregnant and they need more space. It's not like you can't make do with the guest room for a little while." That was it. I saw red. I couldn't believe that not only had my mom supported this idea, but she'd been the one to plant it in their heads. She'd encouraged them to disrespect me and my home, the home I worked hard to afford, the home she and everyone else were living in rent-free. I told her in no uncertain terms that her meddling had gone way too far. She tried to justify it, saying, "I was just thinking about what's best for the family, but I wasn't having it." "You don't get to decide what's best for my house, Mom," I said. "I offered to help you and Dad because you're my parents, but you've crossed so many boundaries I don't even know where to start." She started to argue, but I cut her off, saying, "This isn't up for discussion anymore. Danny and Sophie need to leave. I'm not asking. I'm telling you." The argument that followed was one of the worst fights we've ever had. My mom accused me of being selfish, heartless, and ungrateful. She said I was treating my family like strangers, and that I'd regret kicking them out. I reminded her that they showed up uninvited, tried to take over my bedroom, and have done nothing but make my life hell since they got here. She refused to see reason, insisting I was being dramatic and that I should think of the baby. When Danny and Sophie got home that evening, I didn't waste any time. I handed Danny a formal eviction notice I drafted earlier that day, giving them 48 hours to leave. I told them this wasn't negotiable and that if they didn't leave by the deadline, I'd have no choice but to involve the authorities. Sophie immediately burst into tears, saying, "How could you do this to us?" Danny, of course, got angry. He called me every name in the book, accusing me of being a terrible brother and a heartless person. He said I was kicking out a pregnant woman, like I was throwing them onto the street with no warning. I calmly reminded him that they had an apartment they could go back to and that their financial problems weren't my responsibility. "You put yourself in this situation," I said. "I'm not the bad guy for refusing to be your doormat." The guilt tripping was relentless. My mom jumped in, saying I was tearing the family apart, and that I should let them stay until the baby is born. Danny and Sophie started arguing about where they'd go, while my dad just sat in the corner, pretending none of this was happening. It was chaos, and I've never felt so drained in my entire life. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since I bought this house. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't, Danny and Sophie might try to move their stuff in while I slept. It's ridiculous that it's come to this, but here we are. I'm sticking to the 48-hour deadline. I don't care how much they cry, argue, or guilt-trip me. They've disrespected me, my boundaries, and my home, and I'm not going to let them keep walking all over me. My only regret is that it took me this long to put my foot down. Thanks for letting me vent. Reddit. I don't know how this is going to play out, but at least I finally feel like I'm taking control of my life again. If anyone has advice on how to survive the fallout, I'm all ears. Reddit, it's finally over. Danny and Sophie are out of my house. I wish I could say it ended amicably, but that would be a lie. The last 48 hours were some of the most stressful and emotionally exhausting days of my life. After I gave them the eviction notice, the guilt-tripping reached a whole new level. Danny cornered me in the kitchen that morning and started on his whole "we're family" speech. He kept going on about how I was supposed to support him, how Sophie's pregnancy was a blessing that I should want to help with, and how I was punishing them for being in a tough spot. He even tried to pull the "you're acting like a selfish bachelor" card, saying, "One day, when you have a family of your own, you'll understand what it means to sacrifice." I let him rant without saying much, but inside, I was seething. I've sacrificed plenty. I sacrificed a huge chunk of my income to buy this house and worked my ass off to make it happen. I sacrificed my peace and privacy by letting my retired parents move in rent-free. I didn't need a lecture about sacrifice from the guy who thought moving into my house without asking was acceptable. Sophie wasn't any better. She spent most of the day crying loudly enough to make sure I could hear her, muttering things like, "I can't believe he's doing this to us. And where are we supposed to go?" It was a total performance. I heard her on the phone with someone, probably her mom, saying how I'd thrown a pregnant woman out on the street. She conveniently left out the part where they had an apartment they could go back to but chose to break their lease because they thought they could mooch off me. My mom was furious with me too, of course. She tried one last time to convince me to let them stay, saying, "You're making a mistake, Alex. Family is all we have at the end of the day." I told her I wasn't going to argue anymore. Danny and Sophie had 48 hours to leave, and that was final. She called me heartless, but I didn't care. When the deadline was almost up, Danny and Sophie finally started packing. Watching them shuffle around, sulking and dragging their feet, was surreal. It was like they couldn't believe I was actually following through. Danny tried one last time to guilt me, saying, "You know this is going to cost us a fortune, right? We're going to have to stay in a motel because of you." I didn't bite. I just told him, "You should have thought about that before moving in without asking." He muttered something under his breath about me being a selfish prick, but I let it slide. I was too tired to argue anymore. By the end of the day, they were gone. The house was finally quiet again, but it didn't feel like a victory. I could still hear my mom's disappointed tone and Sophie's crying echoing in my head. I knew I'd done the right thing, but that didn't make it any easier. Now, Danny and Sophie are staying at a motel, and apparently, it's costing them a small fortune. My mom has been complaining nonstop, saying it's my fault they're spending so much money. She keeps saying I should have just let them stay until they figured things out. I told her I wasn't responsible for their poor planning or their financial choices. If they'd been honest and respectful from the start, maybe things would have been different. My dad has stayed mostly quiet through all this, but he did pull me aside to say he understood why I did what I did. It was a small comfort, but I'll take it. Now that they're gone, I'm trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. I finally unpacked the boxes Danny and Sophie shoved into the hallway and put my room back the way I like it. It feels good to have my space back, but there's still this lingering tension in the house. My mom barely talks to me, and when she does, it's short and clipped. At this point, I'm just glad Danny and Sophie are out. I'm bracing myself for the fallout, though. I wouldn't put it past my mom to come up with some new scheme to guilt me into fixing things. But I've made up my mind. I'm done being the family doormat. Thanks for sticking with me through all this. Reddit. I don't know what the next few weeks will look like, but at least for now, I can finally breathe. Hey Reddit, I'm back with an update, and for once, it's not just me venting about family drama. Believe it or not, things have taken a turn for the better, or at least they're starting to. After Danny and Sophie moved out, the tension in the house was unbearable. My mom barely spoke to me for days, and when she did, it was with this icy tone that made it clear she was still furious. My dad, as usual, stayed out of it, which was both frustrating and kind of a relief. I focused on reclaiming my space and trying to enjoy the quiet, but the guilt-tripping lingered in the back of my mind. Then, out of nowhere, things shifted. Started with my dad. One evening, while I was working in my home office, he knocked on the door and asked if he could talk. I'll admit, I was bracing for another lecture, but instead, he sat down and said something I wasn't expecting. "I just want to say thank you, Alex." That caught me off guard. I asked him what he meant, and he said, "For everything. For letting us live here, for putting up with all this, and for standing your ground when it would have been easier to just give in. I know it hasn't been easy, and I'm sorry for the way things turned out." Hearing that meant more than I can explain. My dad isn't the most emotionally expressive guy, so for him to say something like that, I knew he really meant it. He admitted he'd been disappointed with how Danny and Sophie handled things and said he didn't blame me for asking them to leave. "They needed a wake-up call," he said, "and I think you gave it to them." A couple of days later, my mom finally broke her silence too. I was in the kitchen making coffee when she came in and just stood there for a minute, fidgeting with her hands. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "I owe you an apology." I almost dropped my mug. My mom isn't exactly known for admitting when she's wrong, so this was huge. She went on to say she realized she'd been unfair to me and that she should have respected my boundaries from the start. "I thought I was helping Danny and Sophie, but I wasn't thinking about what it was costing you," she said. "You've done so much for us, Alex, and I didn't appreciate that the way I should have." She also promised to back off and respect my space more. "I've been thinking about what you said, about this being your house," she said. "And you're right. You've worked hard for this, and I should have respected that." I was stunned. I wasn't expecting her to change her tune so quickly, but it felt genuine. I told her I appreciated the apology and that I wasn't trying to be cruel or push anyone away. I just needed my boundaries to be respected. She nodded and said she understood now. Since then, things have been better. There's still some lingering awkwardness, and I think it'll take time for everything to fully settle, but my parents have been making an effort. My mom hasn't made any snide comments about how I run the house, and my dad's even been helping me fix a few things around the place. It's not perfect, but it's a start. As for Danny and Sophie, I've heard through the grapevine that they're still at the motel and struggling to figure out their next move. My mom hinted that Danny might try to reach out and apologize, but honestly, I'm not ready to cross that bridge yet. I need time to process everything and figure out what kind of relationship, if any, I want with them going forward. For now, I'm focusing on enjoying the peace and quiet and setting up firmer boundaries with my family. It's been a long, messy road, but I finally feel like I'm starting to take control of my life again. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. Reddit. Your advice and support have been a lifeline, and I don't think I could have gotten through this without it. Hey Reddit. I'm here with what might be my final update. Things have settled down quite a bit, and for the first time in weeks, I feel like I can breathe again. It's been a wild ride, but I think I'm finally starting to find some balance in all of this. After Danny and Sophie moved out, I took a few days to just enjoy the silence. No crying, no guilt-tripping, no passive-aggressive comments, just peace. I finally unpacked all my stuff and got my bedroom back to the way it was before they tried to take over. I even treated myself to a new set of noise-canceling headphones, partly because I deserve it and partly because I'm still paranoid about my dad's TV habit creeping back up. The dynamic with my parents has improved too. My mom's apology seemed to be a turning point. Since then, she's been noticeably more respectful of my boundaries. She hasn't rearranged a single thing in the house, hasn't made any comments about how I live my life, and has even started checking with me before making decisions about household stuff. I think she finally understands that this isn't her house and that she needs to let me take the lead. My dad's been great too. He's always been more low-key, but now he's stepping up in ways I didn't expect. Last week, he fixed the wonky cabinet door in the kitchen that's been bugging me for months, and he's been mowing the lawn without me having to ask. It's not just the chores. It's the way he's been quietly supportive. I think he feels bad about how everything went down and is trying to show that he appreciates me. Then there's Danny. A few days ago, I got a text from him. It was short and to the point. "Hey Alex, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how things went. I know we messed up, and I hope we can move past it someday. Take care." I didn't know how to feel about it at first. On one hand, I was glad he apologized. It's more than I expected from him. On the other hand, it felt incomplete. There was no acknowledgement of the specifics of what they did, no real ownership of how much they disrespected me and my home. It felt like he was checking a box rather than genuinely trying to repair things. I haven't responded yet. I'm not sure if I will. I need more time to process everything before deciding if I'm ready to let him back into my life. Right now, the thought of opening that door again makes me anxious. For now, I'm focused on moving forward. The house feels like mine again, and I'm finally starting to enjoy it the way I intended when I bought it. My parents and I are finding a new rhythm, one that feels healthier and more balanced. It's not perfect, but it's progress, and I'll take that over the chaos I was dealing with before. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's the importance of setting boundaries, even with family. It's not easy, and it can feel selfish, but sometimes it's the only way to protect your sanity and your sense of self. Thank you to everyone who offered advice, shared similar stories, or just listened while I vented. Knowing I wasn't alone in this made a huge difference. You've all been amazing. And with that, I think it's time to close the chapter on this mess and focus on the future. Thanks again, Reddit. You've been a lifeline,